lot of people just think about the real estate side of things and think about the value of their real estate, and they don't realize that they have a whole separate other business if they're doing property management, managing their own properties, and then maybe taking on management of others. And if you set up really good systems, that has a whole bunch of value to it as well, separate from the real estate. So that's really interesting to think about. Do you have like a general valuation too, just for people who might be thinking about going down this road in terms of like, is there a multiplier on revenue or on profit, or how do you value something like that?
So I've actually heard quite a few different things. I'll tell you how I did it. It was 1 year of cash flow per contract.
Okay.
So whatever it would cash flow me, right? Like I knew all my expenses, I knew how everything worked out, I knew what I was grabbing, which was roughly about $20,000 per contract. And so I sold it for roughly that amount plus a little tacked on for the furniture, right? Now other people have sold to Vacasa for like $1,000 to $1,500 a contract, which is nothing, right? Imagine if you had 10 Airbnb management contracts, and then Vacasa came around, you sell their whole business for $10,000. Like that's just, it makes no sense.
Like 1 month. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It makes no sense at all. So I've heard that. And then I've also heard this one guy who has like 100 Airbnb rental arbitrage properties that are like in apartment units, and his business was valued at like 4 million at the time, right? If you were to be selling it to a certain like venture backed group, they would take it on, right? So it depends on how big you are, right? It depends on who you're selling it to, right? And it depends on how well you've built up the systems, the operations, and your contracts, right? All these things kind of going to come together to say like, how solid is this business, and how easily can I take it and multiply it, like, and sell it to somebody else who can make it bigger than what you currently have it going as, right? That was my experience with that.
Got it. Yeah, and that goes back to your first point about thinking through who you're going to sell it to, how you're going to structure it, all that stuff before you even start, which is a great point. So, awesome. Well, I didn't want to dwell on that, but I thought it was really interesting, and I think people are probably, maybe they haven't even thought of that, but they realize now they've got even more value to their business.
One thing I want to add before we actually switch over, because I do work for Superhost Labs, right? I'm the head of data for Superhost Labs. We raise money and buy properties, and they're all short-term rentals, right? All single-family homes, all short-term rentals. And the plan with that is actually to buy so many that we can sell to an investment fund, which we've been getting a lot of interest in. Now, typically, if you were to have one Airbnb and it's a home and you try and sell it, you're going to be selling it based off of the appraisal, right? And what all your neighbors sold it for. It doesn't matter if it's cash flowing $50,000 a year, right? Whereas what we're doing is we're bundling, like somewhere, it's probably going to end up around like 500 by the time we're done. Wow. And we're going to take all 500 of those and sell them as a group. And then it's likely that we'll be able to sell it at way more than appraisal, because they're also buying a business and with cash flowing, with cash flow, right? So that's our game plan. And like I said, we've already sold like 7 homes that sort of way, in a different sort of model. But the plan is that we will be able to sell the entire package that way as well. We have a couple different exit strategies, but just wanted to like throw that one out there. If anyone's, it's just another way that they can be sold, right? And like another example that I have of something that we're currently doing, right?
That is super interesting. Especially since these can work in pretty affordable places where the price points might be low. If you're getting an appraisal, they're basing it on your neighbors, which are homeowners, and so for the average homeowner, that's a fair price. But then, when you look at the nightly rates and the occupancy rate, the income that it brings in, if you evaluate it based on the business and the cash flow, I've run into this exact same issue actually, or this question came up because somebody approached me about selling. And so, I have a duplex that's in a very affordable area, but what it would appraise for based on the comps is not even, it's like 3 times as much if you look at the cash flow that it produces. And so I said, if you want to pay 3 times what the comps are selling for here, I'd sell it to you, because that's the price point that does make sense financially for me. Otherwise, why not just sit on the cash flow? So that's super interesting.
So
go ahead.
So that whole concept there is super, super interesting because of a couple of reasons. Like, one is that homes are because of Airbnb, homes are no longer just homes. They can be businesses, right? We need to like, the mind shift needs to change. A house is no longer just a house. It can also be a business, right? But the issue is that that person who wants to buy your duplex could technically go down the road and buy a duplex that's not an Airbnb and potentially have the same sort of cash flow situation that you're in. So why would he ever buy yours when he can just go down the street, right? So there's always like that, there's another one right there. You could just buy the regular value, right? So in my mind, the only way that this works is at scale, and you're not selling. You can almost think of it as like two parts, right? You're selling the home at the appraised value, and you're selling the business at the cash flow value, right? And that's and you're selling both of those. You're selling an operating business along with the real estate that's attached to it, right? And so then you can get the valuation that you're looking for, but you can't be selling it to Joe Blow who just would go down the street and buy it himself, right? You got to be selling it to somebody who wants infrastructure already ready to go, and they're just trying to scale, right? And I see that as like where the difference is. So anyways, 2 points on that I find like that I consider myself very interesting, and I just don't know really where it's going to end up. But I think over the next like couple of decades that we'll see that continue to shift, especially as the hedge funds get involved. Right?
That is super interesting to think about, because I hadn't thought about it like that. Like I was just looking at one property, but if I like, we're getting up to 21 listings now, and so if I bundled them all together and sold myself with it and said, I'm going to come with this package, or at least my processes will, if I have really good processes in place to where it's plug and play, there's a ton of value to that, especially like you said, to hedge funds or equity, private equity companies that don't want, to take on management or building something. They just want scale. So
I got 2 points on that as well. So one, I wouldn't sell it with you. I would sell it with the option of you training somebody, right? And they can pay that person's salary. And then two, you also are in a really unique position where you train a lot of people and help them get these rentals, right? So you are the center point of all these people, and you have 21 yourself. And I'm sure if you added up how many everyone else in your group has, right, you would probably get to a decent number, right? And then you eventually could get to a point where you all come together and say, we're going to collectively, we're all going to sign under one, and then we're going to sell that to a hedge fund, right? And maybe not every single last person is going to want to do it. Everyone has different timelines and all that different stuff, but there may be like 50 to 100 people within your group that would want to do it, that all have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 properties, right? And now all of a sudden you can leverage your position to help out all these other people to also sell all their properties at a higher valuation, which would just be like the coolest thing. But
wow.
And I'd recommend talking to like a hedge fund manager or something about that, about how to properly structure that. They'll help you do it and maybe take a cut, right? So anyways.
No, that's super interesting. There's so many different ways to go about it. I
It's
mean, the main thing
estate.
is, exactly. But the main thing is like you have an underlying asset that's quality, and you've set up processes around it, and then there's a lot of value no matter how you go about it, or you just sit on it and cash flow like crazy, which is the other option. So very cool. So I do want to kind of transition then. So you mentioned your day job at Superhost Labs, and you're head of data there. So I guess, what does that entail in terms of the tactical day-to-day, and then how does that translate to what you do in your own business as well?
Okay, so my whole job is to make sure that we are only buying properties that are going to cash flow at a certain percentage, right? We have essentially promised a return to our investors, and so I have to find these properties. I have to find the areas where properties exist where the real estate's low enough and the cash flow is high enough that we can hit that certain percentage, right? But the why I have this position is because I get into like the nitty gritty detail, right? So first off, at a high level, I identify markets that are good, then I identify properties within that market, then I identify how to maximize the revenue out of that building, right? And so when I identify a market, I'm looking for like low real estate but good demand of tourism. If I can get that combination of the two, then it's likely that it's going to be able to cash flow, right? Then when I get into the city, then I'm looking into all the different neighborhoods within the city and trying to figure out where's the best place to buy a short-term rental, like where's the highest demand, where are people willing to pay the most. However, also where the real estate is not outrageously expensive, right? And so you got to find that nice combination. Then once you get into that, so say I'm looking at like a specific zip code, then I'm trying to figure out what unit size makes most sense, right? Such as like a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, so on and so forth. And as an example, there's this one place in Phoenix where a 2-bedroom does $34,000 a year on average, but a 3-bedroom does $90,000 a year, right?
Wow.
And so like very clearly you're like, well, 3-bedroom probably makes more sense, right? The other interesting thing is that in that same spot, a 4-bedroom is doing 96,000 and a 5-bedroom is doing like right on 100,000, which means that the most efficient thing to purchase is probably going to be a 3-bedroom. You would think, right? You would think that. Now it actually turns out that most of the time, like 3 bedrooms are almost the exact same price as like a 3 or 4. There's like very little difference just because of the way they build them, right? And so anyways, it just,
so you might as well take the 4-bedroom
or the 5 actually. The 5 actually ends up being the best case scenario because it's anyway. So it's roughly the same price. Yes, it's you know, you just have more people in there, and you're sort of betting on the odds of like more people being there. But that's the idea. So now I'm figuring out what unit size makes most sense, and then it's every single last detail. Like what is driving the revenue? What is causing this home to make $200,000 a year and this home to make $100,000 a year, right? And what I always look for is patterns and trends, right? So the whole thing about data that people sort of don't understand is that data is just about finding a pattern, right? If you see something that's going 2, 4, 6, and then it's nothing, you're like, oh, maybe it's going to be 8, 8, 10, right? And really that's kind of how it works out. And a lot of times I have no background in data. Like I did not go to school for data. And I don't really have any background. I'm not great with math either, right? Data is like what I do on a day-to-day basis is I narrow down where we want to go, right? And then I'm trying to look at what's driving the revenue. So really what I'm doing is just opening up Airbnb listings and looking at what the homes have, right? And I'm tracking that. Do they have a pool table room? Do they have a garage that's outfitted as a game room? Do they have a pool? Do they have a pool heater? Do they have like a mini putt? All these different things. I just kind of keep creating these lists. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating like this, a buy box, right? So I'm figuring out that within this specific spot of Phoenix, if we were to buy a 4-bedroom that was, you know, $700,000, we could probably make about $150,000 a year off of it. However, we need to have a pool with a pool heater, a hot tub, a mini putt. The backyard's got to be a pretty decent size, and the inside has to have 2 living rooms that we can add a pool table in there. And we also have to give it a really cool design, like a mural, and take great photos of it. And then we have what we call like the good bones, right? And then we have the product that could potentially hit $150,000. Now we just have to operate it well and price it well.